Hey homies. Today's special What If Dean Became also suggest crossover characters for Dean Winchester. So move into the video. The first thing Dean noticed upon entering Chuck's house was the blood. He could just barely make out small traces of Raphael's grace lingering. He hoped for the best, but feared the worst. Either way, Castiel was not there. He could feel Chuck's presence, so he hoped the prophet knew where Castiel had got to. He looked up from the mess on the floor when he heard Sam's pained cry. He tried not to laugh at the sight of Chuck brandishing a plunger. Chuck muttered a quick apology and stared. "So, you guys are okay?" Chuck asked uncertainly. Sam gave Chuck a disbelieving look as he touched his head where he had been hit. "Well, my head hurts," he said. Chuck shook his head. No, I mean my last vision," he stuttered. "You went, like, full-on Vader. Your body temperature was 150. Your heart rate was 200. Your eyes were black. You could see Dean's wings." Dean turned his attention to Sam. "Your eyes went black." He regretted saying it the moment Sam turned to him, shamefaced. "I didn't." "It's alright," Dean cut in. "God knows what my grace looks like." He placed a reassuring hand on Sam's shoulder and gave a brief nod. He saw the relief flood over Sam's features and turned back to Chuck. "Where's Kaz?" Chuck shook his head slightly. "He's dead." Dean's breath caught. "Or gone," Chuck continued. "The Archangel smoked the crap out of him. I am sorry." "You're sure?" "I mean maybe he managed to get away," Dean said, not hiding the tremor in his voice. "Ran away. Ditched his vessel at the last second. Something. On, no. He, like, exploded," Chuck replied, gesturing with his arms. "Like a water balloon of chunky soup. I could feel him. He didn't fade, just gone." Dean looked away, distraught. He didn't have time to dwell on his feelings, though. He could feel a small group of angels heading their way. He was not in the mood for their crap. He looked around for a hidden surface to draw a banishing spell on. With Lucifer on the loose and God nowhere to be found, he didn't need to give heaven a reason to hunt him down, too. He looked up and grimaced as Chuck pulled a bloody tooth from his hair. Castiel's vessel was definitely gone. Maybe Castiel was just hiding out somewhere, licking his wounds. Dean sighed. Who was he kidding? Castiel was dead. He didn't really think about it before, but they both knew the younger angel wouldn't escape his confrontation with Raphael with his life. "This has been a really stressful day," Chuck said. Dean nodded as he cut into his hand and pulled the sliding door out. "Kaz, you stupid bastard," he muttered as he began drawing on the door. "Stupid? He was trying to help us," Sam pointed out. He frowned at the bloody symbols Dean was drawing. "Yeah, exactly," Dean replied. He finished up the spell and slid the door back in place. "So what now?" Sam asked. "I don't know," Dean admitted. He gave Sam a worried glance and a shrug. "Oh, crap," Chuck said softly, looking around. Dean nodded and faced away from the kitchen. "I know." "What?" Sam asked in confusion. "Thought we'd find you here." Sam turned quickly to see three men he didn't recognize. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Dean turn to face the angels with a look of feigned surprise. "Playtime's over, Dean," Zachariah said as he tooted some of the debris littering the ground. "Time to come with us." Dean gritted his teeth as Zachariah spoke. Between craving a demon and Castiel gone, he had very little control over himself. He stuck with sarcasm and short replies. It was taking everything he had to keep from flashing his wings. He took solace in being able to push Zachariah's buttons, making the angel more and more irritated as their conversation progressed. Talk of Lucifer's vessel came up and a brief tinge of panic coursed through Dean. "You can stop him, Dean," Zachariah said. "But you need our help." "You listen to me, you two-faced douche," Dean growled. "After what you did, I don't want jack squat from you." "You listen to me, boy," Zachariah snapped back, taking a step forward. "You think you can rebel against us? As Lucifer did?" He laughed derisively, trailing off as his eyes fell on the blood still dripping from Dean's closed fist. "You're bleeding." "Oh, yeah," Dean replied as if he had forgotten. And he actually had forgotten to heal his hand after slicing into it. So much time pretending to be human, it was out of habit that he didn't bother with smaller injuries. A little insurance policy in case you dicks showed up. He pulled out the sliding door and slammed his hand against the sigils. "No." Zachariah screamed as he and the other two angels were banished. "Won't be the first time I rebelled, you son of a bitch," Dean muttered, and he flexed his hand and healed it. "This sucks ass," Chuck whined as he shook his head. Dean grimaced as he looked at Chuck. "Tell me about it, have you seen far enough ahead to know what happens when they find out about me?" he asked. Chuck shook his head. "Doesn't work like that. Besides, you went against my last vision. Didn't end the same. You have any idea what kinda headache I got from the updated vision?" Dean sighed and turned his attention to Sam. "We should get going." Dean desperately wanted a demon. He had already reorganized his duffel 5 times since Sam had left and cleaned his gun about 4. He looked up in surprise as the door to the hotel room opened. He watched as Sam approached him. "Are you real?" he asked. Sam frowned in confusion, then smiled proudly. He pulled out a hex bag from his pocket. "Hex bags." Dean took the bag from Sam. He turned it around in his hands, inspecting it. Now that he held it, he could see his way past the spell. Bits and pieces of Sam's soul shone through, and Dean relaxed. Sam was still obscured from his senses, but at least he knew his brother was actually there. "They'll keep angels and demons from finding us," Sam explained. Dean nodded. "Yeah, I got that," he said, smirking as Sam pulled a frown. "Where'd you get it?" "I made it." The prideful tone was back in Sam's voice. "How?" Dean asked as he frowned at the small pouch in his hand. Hex bags were old magic. And for it to cover angel detection, that made the spell even older. It had been so long since he last encountered one that blocked his senses, he had forgotten about them and half of what went into them. Sam bit his lip and looked away. He looked back at Dean before cautiously replying. "Two learned it from Ruby." "Well, nice to know the bitch was good for something. Speaking of how you doing?" Dean asked. He kept picking at the string that held the bag closed. "Are you geneezing for another hit of bitch blood, or what?" It's weird tell you the truth I'm fine. No shakes, no fever. It's leucusing it all up on Lilith cleaned me right up," Sam replied. He frowned as Dean tossed the bag back and forth. "Dean." "Sam," Dean snapped, annoyed. "It's okay. You don't have to say anything." "Well, that's good," Sam said carefully, keeping an eye on Dean. He watched as Dean paced the hotel room. "Because what can I even say? I'm sorry. I screwed up. Doesn't really do it justice, you know. Look, there's nothing I can do or say that will ever make this right. So why do you keep bringing it up?" Dean shouted as he rounded on Sam. Are you alright?" Sam asked. "I'm fine." "Dean, what you're acting like I did when I needed more demon blood. What's going on?" "I can handle it." Dean shouted, gesturing widely with his arms. The lights flickered and he clenched his fists. He let out a slow breath and the lights returned to normal. "I can handle it," he said more calmly. "I've been through worse. Look, let's just clean up our mess. We'll treat this like any other hunt, alright? So, first things first. We find out where it is," Sam replied as he warily watched Dean's pacing. "Right," Dean said shakily. "So we just gotta find Lucifer. Can you sense him?" Dean shook his head. "My range isn't like it used to be. Without heaven backing me and going through will I'm a little limited and distracted right now. And hell be laying low, anyway." Dean did not know what to make of Becky. Or her easy dismissal of him. At least her infatuation with Sam was good for a laugh. But Chuck's message had him confused. "The Michael sword?" he asked in disbelief. Michael's blade was on Earth. "Becky, does he know where it is?" Sam asked. "In a castle," Becky replied in a mystical tone. "On a hill made of 42 dogs." 42 dogs. Dean flatly replied. He gave Sam a shrug. It didn't make any sense. Even by crazy prophet standards. "Are you sure you got that right?" Sam asked on Dean's behalf. Dean half listened as Becky fawned over Sam. Maybe Chuck had gotten his wires crossed. Heaven would never let an angel's weapon out of their sight. He should know he had tried to chase one down after his had been confiscated. Dude, if there was a chance, they had to take it. He tuned back in to find Becky lovingly stroking Sam's chest. Dean landed unsteadily just outside Bobby's house. He looked over his shoulder, frowning. Something was coming. He reached out with his grace and scanned the area. Demons. One of them felt familiar. He could head out and greet them. No, he didn't need to do that. He was trying to keep a low profile. Dude could really use a pick-me-up. He sighed as he headed inside and searched out Bobby. He found Bobby in the kitchen, speaking on the phone to another hunter. He bounced anxiously on his heels as he waited for Bobby to wrap up his call before announcing his presence. "Hey Bobby." Bobby turned quickly, holding the phone out like a weapon. "Jesus. What the hell did I tell you about doing that, boy?" Dean shifted his weight and gave a shrug. "Sorry. Came in through the door," he replied distractedly. He was tracking the demons, which were quickly making their way to the salvage yard. "Are you expecting company?" Bobby placed the phone in its cradle and gave a soft snort. "No. Why?" "I think you should head to the panic room," Dean said. The demons were currently just outside of Bobby's property. Low profile, he reminded himself. Bobby stiffened and looked out the window. "Like hell I'm gonna just hide out." He made his way past Dean, grabbing his shotgun off the table. Dean followed Bobby into the yard. He crossed his arms as he stood next to Bobby and waited. "Look, there's 4 of them, so be careful." "No weapon?" Bobby asked, glancing at Dean. Dean slowly shook his head. "1 or 3 won't hurt anything. Not this time. To think it's time I sent a message." Bobby gave a stiff nod. They didn't have to wait long before the demons rounded the corner. They paused, the young woman leading them warily eyeing Dean. Dean, you're not supposed to be here, she said, holding up a hand to stop the other demons from advancing further. Hello, Meg, Dean replied. Did you miss me? Meg narrowed her eyes at Dean. How do you know it's me? Dean waved his hand in the air as he replied. Oh, I have my ways. Meg gasped and ducked away when Dean vanished and reappeared, grabbing the demon to her left. She backed into the other two demons and watched in horror as Dean absorbed the demon's life. You're not Dean, she hissed as she pushed one of the other demons in Dean's direction. Dean grinned at Meg and stabbed the demon stumbling towards him in the neck with the demon knife. Come on, Meg, don't be like that, he said conversationally. His eyes flicked between Meg and the final demon. I'm a little insulted you didn't visit me in hell. Meg edged away from the other demon, catching Dean's wandering eyes. Well, I would have loved to come and gloat, but you were pretty deep in there, and Alistair isn't known for liking visitors, she replied. Besides, I had my own problems to deal with. Getting out of hell ain't easy. You should know that. Dean nodded. So, why are you here, Meg? Meg slowly backed away, trying to keep herself further from Dean than the other demon. Why do you think he'll tell you? Dean shifted his gaze to the other demon. How about this first to talk gets to take a message to Lucifer? And get killed anyway? Meg said with a laugh. Yeah, right. I think he'll take my chances here. Dean grinned as he raised his hand, letting the black energy roll off his fingers. He ignored how the tips of his fingers gave off a small crackle of white and red. At least the white was finally dimming away. Things were going back to normal. I was hoping you'd say that, he said and slowly unfurled his wings. Meg's eyes widened. She quickly stepped over to the other demon and shoved him at Dean. He'll do it. She shouted and cringed as her fellow demon's scream was cut short. Dean rolled his neck and stretched his wings, enjoying the surge of dark energy. He looked to Meg and smiled when he found her waiting uncomfortably. Bounty on my head, huh? He grinned wider as she quickly nodded. Something like that. This is worth more than the old man. What are you doing? Bobby shouted. Just stab her. Dean shook his head at Bobby. Meg wore a manic grin. He won't, she said. I know how to find Lucifer. I can get in contact with him. Then you can tell us where he is, Bobby said, training his gun on Meg. Hell, we can probably find that out on our own. And the moment you find out where he is, hell move on to another location, Meg replied. She turned her attention back to Dean and raised her hands in a placating gesture. I can do it, Seraphiel. I can find him. I can send messages. Hess worried about you. Don't listen to her. Bobby pleaded. Dean looked from Meg to Bobby. Lucifer was worried. But what about the anger he had felt? He has us looking for you, Meg continued. I can tell him you're okay. And what's to keep you from telling him where Sam and Dean are? Bobby questioned. What then, huh? Like he doesn't already know, Meg pointed out. He has demons stationed everywhere. We'd know before the angels did. Dean ran his hand over his face and bit his lip. He was having trouble thinking clearly with the high he was riding. Maybe we could. No. Damn it, Dean, Bobby stalked up to Dean and grabbed him by the arm. You can't trust her, and you sure as hell can't trust the devil. Dean looked at Bobby helplessly. But I can fix this, he said uncertainly. If I can just get through to him there doesn't have to be an apocalypse. We are in the goddamned apocalypse. The only way I see of stopping it is to stop Lucifer, Bobby said, giving Dean a stern shake. All the damned prophecies came true. If we don't stop him, then we are all going to die. Everyone. Sam, too. Dean stared at Bobby. It was true. Except for one vital piece, Michael didn't have a vessel. There were other vessels out there, but none were Michael's true vessel. Not like Dean Winchester was supposed to be. Maybe that was why the angels were looking for the so-called Michael sword. Michael wouldn't be able to do much damage without his blade, and using another angel's blade would not be nearly as effective as their personal weapon. I won't tell him your location, Meg offered. It can be part of the deal. Dean looked back to Meg, his interest piqued. A deal could work, he said softly. What? Bobby shouted in disbelief. But I write the contract, Dean said. Meg eagerly nodded. I can't reveal your location to Lucifer, and I can't reveal his location to you or your friends. Dean held his hand out, and a small stack of paper appeared. He flipped through it and handed it to Meg, ignoring Bobby's sputters of indignation. Meg cautiously approached Dean and Bobby and took the papers. She looked over the fairly short contract. It was concise and to the point. No wiggle room, but her safety was assured for as long as she played messenger. It all revolved around her not revealing to anyone, not even inanimate objects, of anything pertaining to Sam, Dean, or Lucifer's whereabouts. She wasn't even permitted to tell anyone else about just who Seraphiel was using as a vessel. There was more detail and description put into what would happen if she broke the contract than the contract itself. "And if he finds out on his own?" she asked. "Then he finds out," Dean replied. "Same goes for me and Sam finding him on our own." Meg nodded and bit the inside of her cheek. "Okay." Bobby threw his hands up in frustration. "Dean." Dean held his hand up to Bobby. "And even though it's not in the contract, keep in mind how much you will suffer if I find out another attack is made on Bobby or anyone else I know in an attempt to get to me and Sam," he warned. Meg nodded. "I can't make any promises for the others, but if I hear anything, I'll warn you." Dean looked at Bobby and flinched at the glare he was receiving. There was something else there as well, but he couldn't place it. "Distrust, worry, resentment, sorrow." "Bobby, it's a good deal," Dean said softly. Bobby looked away and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Do what you have to," he said with a weary sigh. "Well?" Meg prompted, desperation clear in her voice. "Is it a deal? Are we good?" Dean nodded and turned back to Meg. "Yeah, let's get this over with," he said as he stepped forward and cupped Meg's cheek. He leaned down and kissed her gently, feeling the contract seal. "What's the message?" Meg asked breathlessly. Dean sighed and looked off to the side. What did he want to say to Lucifer? That he still cared? That he still loved him? "I am not on heaven's side, not after what they did." Budum not on his side, either. Meg nodded and shifted from foot to foot, keeping an eye on Dean and Bobby. "Okay, so how do I find you when I have Lucifer's reply?" she asked. "Don't think him particularly welcome back here." "Got that right," Bobby said gruffly. "If I see you set foot here again, it'll make you regret it." Dean pulled a frown. It was a good question. After Sam tiptoeing around with Ruby, he was about to pull the same thing. He wondered if Meg was going to start offering up her colleagues. The part of him that was still thinking straight was disgusted at how giddy he felt at the prospect of having his own personal dealer. She would probably happily do it too. He tried to dismiss the thought and reached into his back pocket to pull out his wallet. He handed Meg one of the various business cards. "Gimme a call. Meeting up probably ain't too safe, considerin'." Meg pocketed the card and quickly backed away. When she was a fair distance away, she turned and bolted. Bobby shook his head in dismay and headed back into the house. "What are you gonna tell Sam?" he asked. "I ain't gonna lie to him for you." Dean shrugged as he followed Bobby into the kitchen. "The truth, I guess. Hess not gonna like this." "You think?" Bobby grunted in irritation at Dean. "You just opened yourself to a whole new level of manipulation, you idiot." Dean looked away. "I know, but I have to try," he said, his desperation clear. "It doesn't have to be like this. Lucifer doesn't have to end the world. I think he might listen to me." "And what about the other angels? You really think they'll let him run free? What about Castiel? What's he gonna think about this?" Dean's breath hitched and he slumped into a chair. Hess dead." Bobby's features softened and he laid a hand on Dean's shoulder. "We'll get through this," he said. "Even with your stupid choices." Dean gripped Bobby's hand tightly. "I can fix this," he promised, looking up at Bobby. Dean tapped his fingers on the steering wheel as he waited for Sam to return with food. What he really wanted was another demon. He had tried grabbing a few ghosts on his way to pick up Sam, but they did nothing to sate his craving. He clenched his eyes shut as another wave of need rolled through his grace. Why did he have to start up again? He had kicked the habit so long ago. "Are you okay?" Dean looked over to find Sam staring at him in worry. "Yeah, just peachy," he lied. "Dean?" Dean shook his head and started the car. "He'll be fine. I just need to sit around for a while and wait it out. I've done it before. I can do it again." It was sort of true. The only reason he had kicked the habit before was due to demons giving him a wide berth. Sam nodded uncertainly, hoping Dean was right. By the time Sam and Dean arrived, Bobby had already been through several books, looking for any information on the Michael sword. He sighed and gave the two young men a weary stare as he flipped open another book. "You sure you don't know anything about this?" he asked Dean. Dean gave a shrug as he flopped onto the couch. "Every angel has a sword. But it's not like it's special," he replied. He leaned forward and rubbed the heel of his hand against his forehead. Sam and Bobby exchanged a look. "Well, is there any chance there was one that was made just for him?" Sam asked. "It doesn't work like that," Dean snapped. "An angel gets one blade. It's like an extension of our grace. It's near impossible to lose, so I don't know how the fuck Michael would have managed to lose his." He slumped back against the couch and stared up at the ceiling. "Probably 'cause he's such a dumbus." "So do you have one?" Sam asked. Dean managed to pull his head up and glare at Sam. "It was confiscated," he ground out. Sam shrank back and turned his attention to the book Bobby had open. "Okay, so, we're looking for an actual sword. Maybe it's in a collection somewhere. Someone somewhere must have come across it." "We'll have to be quick about it," Bobby said. "We won't be the only ones looking for it." Dean let out a pained moan as he slumped over. Sam rushed to his brother's side and lightly touched his arm. He gasped as Dean swiped at him. "Don't touch me. God, don't even fucking talk to me," Dean shouted. He stood unsteadily and glared at Sam. "This is all your fault. If you had just stopped to listen, then none of this would be happening." "This is not Sam's fault," Bobby cut in. He slowly reached into a desk drawer, placing his hand around a small handgun. "Why don't you go lie down?" Dean spread his wings out, casting dark shadows against the walls. "It is his fault. I may have broken the first seal, but Lilith was the final seal. Lucifer is free because of him," he hissed, pointing at Sam. "This time was supposed to be different. Why can't I have a brother that's not out to end the world?" Sam glanced at Bobby and quickly looked away. Bobby pulled the gun out of the desk, but kept it by his side. "Calm down, Dean," he said. "This isn't you talking. Just take a breath and go lie down." Dean growled and clutched at his hair in frustration. He couldn't focus. Nothing was going right. No one ever listened to him. They just told him what to do. He outranked everyone, and they still bossed him around. Even humans that knew who and what he was kept telling him what to do. Why couldn't they just listen to him? He just needed them to listen. To do what he said. He didn't need to calm down. He knew what he needed. Dean vanished, and Sam gave Bobby a hopeless look. "Hess right," he eventually said. His stomach dropped as Bobby narrowed his eyes. "I am so. They're both damned idiots," Bobby grumbled as he placed the gun back in the drawer. He took his cap off and ran his hand through his hair before replacing the cap. "How the hell are we supposed to lock him up if nothing works on him?" Sam frowned as he shrugged. "Bobby Hess right. This is all my fault. Lilith was the final seal, and I killed her. If I had just you guys warned me about Ruba the demon blood but I didn't listen." He trailed off as Bobby laid a hand on his shoulder. "You planning on fixing your mess?" Bobby asked. Sam nodded. Bobby pulled Sam into a hug. "Ain't nobody cutting you out, boy," he said as he let go of Sam. "Dean, either. We all make mistakes. The best we can do is make up for 'em." Sam took a shaky breath and nodded. "Thanks, Bobby," he said quietly. Sam looked up from the book he was reading when he heard the harsh beating of wings. A loud bang and curse from the hall alerted him to Dean's return. He stared at the doorway in apprehension, unsure as to what Dean's mood would be. "Sammy," Dean greeted as he stumbled into the study. "Hey, sorry about earlier," he said as he slumped onto the couch. Sam frowned at Dean and sighed as he looked away. "Feeling better?" he asked. Dean propped his elbow in the couch arm and rested his head in his hand. "Pretty good, actually," he replied. He felt great. It hadn't taken him very long to track down a small group of demons. "We still good?" Sam stared at the book in front of him. He reluctantly nodded. "Yeah but, Dean I thought you were going to stop." Dean gave a nonchalant shrug as he picked at a loose thread on his jeans. "You about that? Do we need to lock you up?" Bobby asked as he entered the room. Dean laughed and shook his head. "Nah, it'll be fine," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "Just need to wean myself off." Bobby shared a look with Sam. "Not cold turkey, then?" "It'll be useless if I do that," Dean said, staring at his nails. "Why do you guys have nails?" "I mean, claws I get, but these things. They don't really do anything." "No. How did you manage to play human under a hunter's nose for so long?" Bobby asked. "John may not have been the best father to you boys, but he was a good hunter." Dean bit at his nails and thought. Something tugged at his memory. His father no, his other father John had a castle something. 42 dogs. Dean gasped as he sat up straight. "Dad." Sam stood up and stared at Dean in confusion. "What about Dad?" He blinked when Dean vanished and reappeared within seconds, holding up a card. "What's that?" he asked. Dean shook the card and grinned. "Dad's lockup in upstate New York," he said proudly, handing the card to Bobby. "Read it." "Castle Storage 42 Rover Hill," Bobby read aloud. He looked back up at Dean. "The castle on a hill of 42 dogs," Sam said in realization. "That's where the sword is." "We had it the whole time," Dean said, shaking his head. "You sure that's what Chuck meant?" Bobby asked. Dean shrugged and took the card back. Not sure what else he cold meant. "Right. Well, you boys be careful," Bobby said. "And try to stay out of trouble. And, for the love of God, lay off the demons." Dean had the decency to look ashamed. "Why yeah I'll do that," he replied, refusing to look Bobby in the eye. The drive to Castle Storage was littered with rest stops. Sam knew what Dean was doing during his so-called bathroom breaks. He wondered if he had been so painfully obvious with his own addiction to demon blood. He let out an annoyed sigh as Dean slowed the car down. "Really can't you go for more than 5 minutes without a fix?" Dean shook his head distractedly. "Something's not right." Sam looked out the window. He saw the lit up sign to the storage facility. "Demons?" he asked. Worse. Angels, Dean replied. He groaned in frustration. Damn it. They beat us to it. Not necessarily, Sam argued. If they had already found it, they would have left. Why hang around? Dean gave a nodding shrug. Well, let's get in and get out. Sam and Dean had their shotguns ready as they entered the room. Dean glanced around, not seeing anything out of the ordinary. So nice of you to join us, a voice said from behind them. They turned to find Zachariah smiling smugly at them. Behind him stood a pair of angels. We were wondering how long it would take you to get here. What do you mean? Sam asked. We may have planted that particular piece of prophecy inside Chuck's skull, but it happened to be true, Zachariah said. We did lose the Michael sword. We truly couldn't find it. Until now. You've just hand-delivered it to us. Dean frowned as his stomach clenched. He would have known if he had an angel blade. What else could the Michael sword be? We don't have anything, he said. He wondered how quickly he and Sam could escape the room. It's you, Chucklehead, Zachariah said. You're the Michael sword. Dean breathed in sharply. Why hadn't he figured it out earlier? The vessel. Of course. What, you thought you could actually kill Lucifer? Zachariah said with a laugh. You simpering wad of insecurity and self-loathing. No, you're just a human, Dean. And not much of one. Dean glared at Zachariah. He kept seeing flashes of claws tearing into his wings, teeth ripping away feathers, multiple faces giving animalistic grins as he begged for it all to stop. A vessel, he said, voice tight with emotion. I won't do it. He'll die first. Zachariah tilted his head, losing his pleased grin momentarily. Joking. Always joking. Well, no more jokes, he said, pointing his finger at Dean. Dean stiffened. He was frozen with fear. His mind replaced the pale finger with a bloody claw, ready to tear into him and pluck each and every feather away. He watched in horror as the finger shifted to point at Sam. He didn't hear what Zachariah said, but he did hear the loud crack of bones breaking and Sam's anguished scream. You son of a bitch. Dean shouted and glared at Zachariah. He shook as Zachariah's wings spread out threateningly. Sam was hurt, but he could fix that later. He hoped he would be able to fix it. He had trouble focusing on what Zachariah was saying. He caught the words General, Michael, and Vessel. He put the rest together. You need my permission, Dean pointed out. Unfortunately, yes, Zachariah grudgingly admitted. Well, there's gotta be another way, Dean said. There had to be a backup plan. Why else would God let him get away with Michael's vessel? There's no other way, Zachariah replied. There must be a battle. Michael must defeat the serpent. It is written. Dean's eyes flicked to the two angels standing behind Zachariah. Would he be able to take them all? Aside from a human gun, he was weaponless. Running away was probably his best option. He knew he was fast, even with his damaged wings. But, he would have to grab Sam, and that would slow him down and throw him off balance. He wouldn't be able to get them both away, and he couldn't leave Sam behind. He threw Zachariah a glare. Yeah, maybe, but, on the other hand, eat me, he growled. The answer's no. Zachariah narrowed his eyes, then smiled. Okay. How about this, say yes, and well heal Sam. Say no hell never walk again. Dean quickly glanced at Sam. The nod was minute, but it was all he needed. No. Zachariah's wings gave an irritated flap. Then how about we heal you from stage 4 stomach cancer? He offered with a sick grin. Dean felt his insides twist and mold to the angel's will. He stood his ground, coughing blood into his hand. No, he ground out. He refrained from healing himself. If this was how Zachariah treated Michael's vessel, then Dean could only guess at what tortures Zachariah would come up with for a fallen angel. Zachariah's expression became vicious as he stared at Dean. Then let's get really creative, he said. Let's see how Sam does without his lungs. Dean's head turned quickly to see Sam fight for breath. He blinked rapidly as his body screamed in pain. If Sam were to die, would he be able to bring him back? Could he fix the damage Zachariah had caused? He closed his eyes in frustration. Without heaven backing his power, he wouldn't be able to bring Sam back to life, nor restore his lungs. Legs, he might be able to fix. Missing organs were a whole other story. Are we having fun yet? Zachariah asked teasingly. You're going to say yes, Dean. Dean glared up at Zachariah. He could just make out another angel approaching their location. Just kill us, he spat out. Kill you? Oh, no, Zachariah said, shaking his head. I'm just getting started. Dean grimaced as the new angel landed. He stared, not able to believe what he was seeing. Carefully, he reached out and felt Castiel's grace around him. He sighed, unable to keep the relieved smile off his face. Zachariah frowned in confusion and turned just as a flash of light erupted behind him. He watched as one of the angels he had brought with him fell to the floor, dead. He did nothing as Castiel fought the other angel. Castiel stabbed the second angel in the back and turned his attention to Zachariah, calmly approaching him. Zachariah brushed his grace along Castiel's, confirming it was truly Castiel. "How are you?" "Alive," Castiel supplied. "That's a good question. How did these two end up on that airplane?" "Another good question." Dean quickly looked away. He knew how he ended up on the plane. Alpha did have a guiding light. Because the angels didn't do it. "I think we both know the answer, don't we?" Castiel said, flexing his wings. Zachariah shook his head. "No. That's not possible," he said, a tinge of fear in his voice. "It scares you," Castiel said knowingly. "Well, it should. Now, put these boys back together and go. I won't ask twice." Sam gasped as his body was restored to normal. Carefully, he stood on shaky legs. He looked over at Dean to find his brother kneeling on the ground, staring up at Castiel. Castiel walked up to Dean and looked down at him uncertainly. There was so much more darkness laced throughout his grace than before. "What happened?" he asked quietly, kneeling in front of Dean. Dean threw himself forward and clung onto Castiel. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. "Please be real. Please, please be real." Castiel hugged Dean back and rubbed soothing circles along his back. "I'm real," he said. He looked up at Sam and sighed. "You two need to be more careful." "Yeah, we got that," Sam replied. "Never thought angels could be that heartless." Castiel shook his head as he helped Dean to stand. He shivered as Dean's grace twisted around his own and wings wrapped around him. "I don't mean the angels," he said. "Lucifer is circling his vessel. And once he takes it, those hex bags won't be enough to protect you." Dean stiffened. He reluctantly pulled away from Castiel. "Lucifer's vessel?" he asked shakily. Castiel nodded. "A man named Nick." Relief flooded Dean, and he relaxed. He frowned as Castiel placed a hand on both his and Sam's chests. He winced as pain raced through his ribs, carving an Enochian spell as it went. What was that?" Sam asked as he rubbed his chest. "An Enochian sigil," Castiel replied. "I don't like it," Dean said. "Unlike the hex bag, he couldn't see past it." "It will hide you from every angel in creation," Castiel explained. "Including Lucifer." "Dean too," Sam said as he looked at Dean. Dean nodded uncomfortably, staring down at himself. "This feels weird." "Hey, cause were you really dead?" Sam asked. "Yes," Castiel replied. He stretched his wings out as Dean's grace slowly caressed his own. He grimaced and stepped away from Dean. "Then how are you back?" Dean asked quietly. "Did their father really bring Castiel back?" He gasped when Castiel vanished, a short apology sent swiftly along his grace. Castiel landed heavily in the study of Bobby's house. He looked around in confusion when he didn't see the old hunter. "God damn it," Bobby shouted as he entered the study. He sucked in a breath and reached for a gun that wasn't there. "Ain't you supposed to be dead?" "I was," Castiel replied, turning to face Bobby. Does Dean know you're alive?" Castiel nodded, thinking back to Dean's grace clutching onto his own. "He is the reason why I'm here." "Has Dean been acting like a junkie?" Bobby finished. "Yeah. Kid's messed up until he takes a hit off a demon, then it's all sunshine and flowers." "I see." Castiel looked away. Had been so much corruption pulsating along Dean's grace that Castiel had trouble not reading him as a common demon. It was why he fled. Away from Dean. Away from the dark energy. "And we can't do anything about it. Can't lock him up to sweat it out," Bobby said as he crossed his arms. "It'd do the same thing we tried with Sam, youth can get out of anything." "I know of a way," Castiel quietly replied. "Bring him here and keep him here until I return." "Yeah? And what if he suspects something?" "What would he suspect?" Castiel asked with a small smile. "Nothing can contain him." And with that, Castiel vanished, leaving Bobby alone to wonder just what the angel had in mind. Dean got out of the Impala and stretched. He flexed his wings and grinned happily. "You didn't have to do that," Sam grumbled as he got out. "Would you rather have em running around, killing innocent people?" Dean countered as he turned and leaned over the roof of the car. He gave Sam a lopsided grin. "You could have used the knife," Sam pointed out. "You have the knife, Sammy." "No. I don't," Sam ground out. "Just know what? Never mind. Let's just see what Bobby wants." "Something about some signs I don't really remember," Dean admitted with a half shrug. Sam shook his head as he headed to the house. "Maybe if you had actually listened to him," he said under breath. "I heard that." Dean flipped through one of the books on the desk before tossing it aside. "Nothing in here." "You sure it's an omen?" he asked. "I mean, termites are bad, but omen bad." "We're looking for a pattern," Bobby growled. "Well, looking for Lucifer I dunno, Bobby," Dean whispered. "Has gonna be real careful. He won't stay anywhere too long. Which is why we need to focus and get this done quick." Dean nodded distractedly as he looked over the map Bobby had tacked to the wall. Maybe he gasped as he felt Castiel's presence. He stood and looked around expectantly. "Cause," he called out. Bobby held his breath and kept an eye on Dean. He slowly shook his head when Sam gave him a curious look. Dean reached out, searching for Castiel's presence. When his grace touched Castiel's, he received a short burst of need. He tripped over his own feet as he made to meet Castiel. He quickly stood and, blushing, turned to face Sam and Bobby. "He'll lob right back," he said. 5 minutes. 10. Maybe more. Definitely more. Sam gave a short laugh as Dean stumbled out of the room. "What was that about?" "Oz thinks he can keep Dean locked up," Bobby replied. Sam let out a slow breath. "Is he sure?" Bobby gave a shrug as he shook his head. "I hope so." Dean grinned as he hopped down the stairs to the basement. Castiel didn't hate him. He turned the corner, and his heart swelled at the sight of Castiel standing in the middle of the panic room. "You came back," he said as he approached the room. Castiel nodded, giving an awkward smile. "I thought that we could enjoy each other's company in private," he replied. Dean's grin widened. Cautiously, he lifted his hand and lightly touched Castiel's cheek. "I thought I lost you," he whispered. Castiel closed his eyes and leaned into Dean's touch. "For a moment, you did." His breath caught as he found Dean's hands eagerly pulling at his clothing. He gasped as Dean's grace caressed his own. Dean. "Yeah?" Dean kissed his way down Castiel's jaw and neck. "You wanted to try something?" Dean halted and stared curiously at Castiel. "Oh?" He poked at Castiel's grace, trying to find any hint of what Castiel had in mind. "Close your eyes," Castiel said, leaving small ghosting kisses on Dean's lips. Dean searched Castiel's eyes for a clue, but came up empty. He sighed and closed his eyes. "This had better be good," he said. He let out a soft whine when Castiel pulled away. "Stay there." Dean grunted and crossed his arms. He followed Castiel's path with his grace, sending light promises of what he was going to do to the young angel. "Dean," Castiel warned, brushing Dean's grace away, "no peeking." Dean pulled his grace back and tapped his foot. "Come on, man. Hurry up." There was the sound of a match being struck, and Dean's eyes flew open in time to see the edge of the circular room burst into bright flames. His breath came in short rasps as he slowly turned to face the open door. "Castiel." Castiel looked away. "Please forgive me," he said softly. "But this is for the best." Dean closed his eyes and clenched his fists. "Holy oil, huh? Yeah, I understand. And to forgive you. You won't feel that way in a few hours," Castiel pointed out. He looked back at Dean and gave him a sad smile. "I promise that I will be here when it's over." Dean laughed bitterly as he shook his head. "Yeah, but you won't stick around to watch, will ya?" Castiel shifted uncomfortably. "Do you wish me to stay?" Shaking his head, Dean looked around the small room. It was completely void of the normal furniture. Why hadn't he noticed before? No, he knew why. Had been too eager chasing pretty angel tail to notice. "It ain't gonna be pretty. Last time I kicked the habit I may have started the crusades," he said and gave Castiel a sheepish grin. He wiped the grin off his face when Castiel looked at him in disappointment. "Sorry." Castiel sighed and crossed his arms. Bobby fell against his desk as the house shook. The hell was that? Castiel appeared in the doorway, looking worse for the wear. "Oz, you okay?" Sam asked. Castiel shook his head and grabbed a door jamb for support as the house shook again. "He's not himself right now," he shakily replied. "Is he causing this?" "Feels like a damn earthquake," Bobby said, catching a frame as it fell off the wall. "I would not think him capable of this, but Seraphielus was one of heaven's most powerful angels," Castiel replied. "I believe he will burn through the demonic energy quickly, but I want him to be rid of all of it. The demons, the ghosts, the vampires, everything." "Didn't you do that before?" Sam asked as he righted a fallen lampstand. Castiel shook his head. "He depleted his reserves fighting me then. No, what I have in mind is a complete cleansing of his grace." "Won't that make him unable to get past angel proofing?" Bobby asked. He stumbled as another jolt threw him off balance. "Unfortunately, Dean will always be marked by his time in hell and his sins," Castiel replied. He cast his eyes downward and hugged himself with his wings. "He is, essentially, part demon. That, I cannot change. But I can remove the extra energies clouding his grace. I think may be able to access heaven's power." "What?" Sam and Bobby stared at Castiel in shock. "But what about when he just got out of hell?" Sam said. "He won't have had any monsters. He needs to make the connection with his own power," Castiel explained. "When I brought him back, he fought me the entire way. I had thought he was just a particularly strong soul, but he shook his head and sighed. He had no power when I brought him back. Had he waited long enough, I believe he would have been able to reach heaven's power if he had cared to tried. But he fell. He was banished," Sam pointed out. "I've fallen," Castiel replied. "I have not been truly banished yet. But I can still feel heaven's power through my grace. I imagine it was the same for Anna." The path is still there, but me power is severely limited to what I was capable of before. But back at the storage you took out those other angels and scared off Zachariah. Castiel pulled a face and shrugged. I was bluffing. The shaking subsided and Bobby hesitantly replaced the frame on the wall. He thought better of it and set it on the floor. So how long's this gonna take? He asked. Hours? Days? I don't know, Castiel admitted. He has the capacity for a lot of stored energy and from what I could feel has been consuming every demon that has crossed his path. That'd be about right, Sam said with a bitter nod. That's why it took us twice as long to get here. Castiel sighed and moved further into the room. Then it will all depend on whether or not he conserves his energy. Is there a way to make him burn through it more quickly? Sam asked as he looked down the hallway to the door leading to the basement. Provoke him, Castiel said, barely above a whisper. It won't take much. Just stand there. His Enochian is quite colorful. A much older dialect than I am familiar with, but from what I can make out, he is quite creative with the insults. A hand settled on his shoulder and gave a light squeeze. He looked up to see Sam giving him a sympathetic look. It'll be fine. Bobby frowned as his gaze drifted to the hallway. So if we have someone down there at all times, this should go a lot quicker, he said. And just how safe is that? If he can start a mini earthquake, woe's to say he won't bring down the whole house. That was actually the worst he is capable of, Castiel replied. He was quite angry with me. All right, then we'll take it in turns, Sam said, heading towards the basement door. Sam, Castiel called out. Sam stopped just short of the door and turned to face Castiel, waiting for the angel to continue. No matter what he says, no matter what he does, do not extinguish the flames, Castiel warned. Sam nodded and headed down the stairs. He was not prepared for the sight that greeted him when he rounded the corner. Dean sat, crouched over, on the floor in the center of the flaming circle. He had removed his shirts and coat and had tossed them aside. His legs were crossed and his hands rested loosely on his knees and covered in blood. He looked up when he heard a gasp and grinned at Sam. Sam had a big heart. Sam didn't like to see others hurt. Sam was gullible. Sam stepped back as Dean sat up straight, revealing the deep scratches across his stomach, chest, and sides. Bits of skin hung loosely and blood dripped slowly down Dean's torso. Sammy, Dean greeted. I think I hurt myself. Sam rushed forward but stopped just short of the open doorway. He narrowed his eyes in suspicion as Dean's smile widened. How are you doing? He asked. Dean pulled a frown. I'm in pain, he flatly replied. Unless I'm hallucinating all this blood. Sam leaned against the doorframe as his eyes traveled over his brother. Why are you doing this? He asked quietly. I could ask you the same thing, but humans don't need much reason, do they? Dean shot back. You're not helping me. You're just making it worse. Dean, this is for your own good. Kaz says. That I can access heaven's power. And you believed him, Sammy, there is no backdoor. Dean shouted as he shakily stood, spreading his wings for balance. Don't you think I've tried? Sam took a step back as ragged shadows were cast about the room. He gasped when Dean flinched and hugged himself, the flames next to him sparking. Dean. Dean huffed and sat back down, staring at his lap. I've tried, he insisted. I can barely access angel radio anymore. I know I can't tap into heaven's power. But Kaz. That's young, Dean said. Stupid, idealistic, he doesn't know anything. Fuck, he wasn't even there when I fell. Wasn't created yet. He sighed and leaned back on his hands, staring up at Sam. His heart's in the right place, you doesn't know anything. This cleansing won't work. It's worth a try, Sam offered. Dean shook his head and looked away. Even after I get all this demon shit out of my system, I still won't be able to do it. I've been through this before. It's hard, it's been but it's pointless. If he keeps me trapped for as long as he wants, it'll be completely useless. You were never useless. Dean gave Sam a sad smile. Wasn't much use against Azazel. Couldn't save Mom. Couldn't save Dad. Couldn't even save you. You did your best, Sam argued. I got distracted, Dean pointed out. Forgot about Mom's deal with Azazel after the crash, too. Wasn't in a coma when Dad got ganked. I was off on a vacation. Messed with you on the Ouija board, possessed a nurse, and had some fun. Messed with that Reaper for a bit before I got slammed back into this meat suit. He sighed heavily and scratched his head. I dunno, maybe I shoulda tried harder at least. Right now, I actually have the power to do something. Sam stared at the flame separating them. I'm not letting you out, he said. He looked up and flinched at the cold look Dean was giving him. I let her die. Sam's stomach clenched. What? Your little girlfriend. Jess, right. As if I couldn't find John on my own, Dean said. I knew about the demons, knew about their plan. They are lying, Sam said, his voice catching. Dean leaned forward, propping his elbows on his knees. He grinned up at Sam and tilted his head. I may as well have killed her myself. Sam's heart beat harshly in his chest. There is no way you could ha. I called in a favor and sent that sorry excuse you call a father on a wild goose chase. Dragged you away on an easy hunt. She was supposed to be dead by the time we got back, Dean spat. But, no. I got cocky. Didn't think to check the area before dropping your sorry ass off. Dean. And there she was. Burning away on the ceiling, he continued. Just like you're pathetic. He looked away as his breath hitched. Just like Mo Mary, he finished, voice barely about a whisper. Sam hugged himself as he stared at Dean in disbelief. Why? He asked. Why did you let it happen? Dean didn't answer. Without getting up, he turned his back on Sam, the tips of his wings brushing against the flames. He kept them as close to the fire as he could, savoring the pain he knew he deserved. Dean. Tell me. Because I have to protect you. I promised her, Dean sobbed. I promised swore you'd never get hurt. You weren't supposed to know. It was gonna look like an accident. No connection to demons. You'd be sad, but happy. Nothing supernatural. Just normal, shitty luck. Sam closed his eyes and breathed evenly. You did it to keep me out, he said in quiet realization. Dean nodded as he absently scratched at the drying blood on his chest, smearing the fresher drips. Couldn't kill the demons cause that draw too much attention. Couldn't warn you cause you'd hate dragging Jess into the life. She was a good soul. Went straight to heaven. He glanced over his shoulder. If that's any consolation. Not really, Sam replied, shaking his head. Aside from the gentle fizzing sound of Dean's wings grazing the fire, the room was silent. A soft whoosh alerted Sam to Dean's sudden movement. He looked up and jumped back a foot when he found Dean standing directly in front of him. I'm hungry. I don't know. Dean narrowed his eyes. He got as close to the edge of the circle as he could and gave a harsh beat with his wings, sending flames shooting out of the room. I'm not going anywhere. All I want is some food. Maybe a beer. Sam took a few more steps back. I'll ask cause, okay? He fell against the wall as the floor beneath him shook. He looked up to see Dean's eyes glowing a bright green. Then I'll feed myself, he said calmly. Sam watched in horror as Dean reached up and slowly dug his fingers into his neck. Dean, stop. Make me, Dean rasped as he pulled down, tearing at his flesh. Blood poured from his neck and down his chest. He pulled his hand away and brought his fingers to his lips. Don't look so squeamish, Sammy, he said as he casually licked at his fingers. You're the blood drinker. You should be used to this. Sam clenched his eyes shut and turned his face away. Please stop, he whispered. This isn't you. You don't know me. Dean screamed. He hugged himself and dragged his nails across his arms, leaving deep ragged gouges. You never knew me. How could a human even hope to understand me? Of course I know you, Sam replied, glancing at Dean. He quickly looked away from the scratches that resembled the damage caused by a hellhound. You're my brother. Lucifer is my brother, Dean hissed, making Sam flinch. And he wants me back. He loves me. He won't keep me trapped in this hole. I'm doing this because I love you, Sam said. You did the same for me. You were a threat. I needed help and now no, I'm helping you. Dean glared at Sam. His grace felt like it was being torn apart. Why didn't anyone understand? He needed to get out. Ease the pain. Sam wouldn't understand. No human could possibly understand the pain he was going through. They only understood on a physical level. He briefly wondered how well he could heal his vessel. Sam gave Dean an uneasy stare. He tensed when it appeared that Dean had come to a decision. A series of loud cracks echoed through the basement and Dean's breathing turned to soft, wet gurgles. Sam's eyes widened as blood began seeping out of Dean's mouth. I am not letting you out. He shouted. He gasped as Castiel appeared in front of him. Come to join the party, Amidax Altelich. Dean asked. We need to place proper warding around the perimeter, Castiel said as he turned to face Sam. A spell, Sam breathed. Castiel nodded before turning back to Dean. He stalked up to the edge of the flames, matching Dean's glare. Do you want the others to find you? Dean gave a bloody snort and grinned at Castiel. Let them come. I can take them. You're trapped, Castiel pointed out. If they were to find you like this. Then maybe you should let me out. This isn't helping. You can't purify me. Dean wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. It did little to stop the steady flow of blood. What do you think Zachariah will do when he finds out? Or perhaps Michael? I don't think they'll take too kindly to your possession of this vessel, Seraphiel. Dean flinched away at his name. I can take them, he said shakily. Because you did so well the last time, Castiel said, shaking his head. He let his eyes linger on Dean's wings. I had heard stories of how beautiful your wings were. How magnificent you were. Before the war. Before you were cast out. If they find you this time, I doubt they'll stop at your wings. Dean's breathing became shallow. You won't let them. I'm not so certain. Castiel turned away from Dean and headed for the stairs. He placed a hand on Sam's shoulder and pulled him along. Cause. Castiel. Dean paced back and forth. His voice caught in his throat as Sam turned away, following Castiel. Sam? Sammy, cause you can't leave. He shouted as he sent a wave of energy out. Sam lost his balance, but managed to catch himself on the wall. He looked over his shoulder at Dean and quickly looked away again. Fix yourself up. I gotta help cause, he said. Oh, I'll fix myself up good, Dean savagely promised. Castiel closed his eyes and forced himself not to run to Dean's aid when a loud snap filled the air, followed by the sound of Dean hitting the floor. I suggest you heal yourself, he said quietly. If you don't, then you will have no company for the rest of your stay in that room. Dean watched, flabbergasted, as Sam and Castiel silently turned the corner and ascended the stairs. Sammy. Cause. Gee guys. He coughed as he pulled himself into a sitting position, cringing as his power failed to keep him from feeling the pain from the damage he had caused. Without his audience, he had no reason to sport his wounds. He focused his power on mending his bones and frowned when then pain didn't ease. He tried again, a flash of panic running through him when he felt no different. No 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 no. He shook out his hands and tried to keep his breathing even, concentrating on what little of his grace was still pure. He focused on the smaller lacerations across his front, feeling relief as they healed. He then shifted his attention to his ribs. Dean doubled over in a fit of bloody coughs as the bones slowly moved back into place. He scratched his nails across the floor, doing his best not to break his concentration. He gasped and wheezed as he managed to fix one rib. 1 down, 5 to go. He steeled himself as he set to mending the next rib. Nothing happened. Slowly, he sat up, he tapped into the darker energy running through his grace and choked back a sob as the bleeding stopped, but the wound remained open. Silently, Dean crawled to the center of the room and hid himself beneath his wings. How long was Castiel going to leave him there? He could already feel his vessel dying. He shouldn't have tried busting out of the circle. Definitely shouldn't have used his own power to do so. He should have used the demonic energy he had stored up instead. He shivered as his grace hummed hungrily. How long could he last? It took a lot more power to keep his vessel alive with the demonic power of his grace than his angelic side, but he was completely spent. Was that what they really wanted? For Dean's vessel to die and rot away? He didn't want that to happen. He was Dean Winchester. It was his body. His first real possession. Something that was all his. He had possessed humans before, but he always had to share with the human soul that had been there first. The constant chatter and worries were always sifting through the background. This empty body gave him silence. No crowding in with the soul. No screams of confusion. It was his. The little broken body that he had brought back to life. If he looked at it from the right angle, then it was a gift from his father. After all, he had let Seraphiel take over as Dean Winchester. He had to have known. And now no, he had gone and fucked it up. Ruined his precious gift. With each beat of his heart, he could feel the life draining from his vessel. Why did he have to be so bullheaded? Dean spat a mouthful of blood to the floor. He lightly ran his hands along his arms as he hugged himself. He had felt his vessel die before, ripped to shreds. But back then, he had the power to numb the pain. He probably could have healed the damage had there been no contract. He hung his head and was unable to keep the tears from falling from his eyes. I don't want to die, he whispered brokenly to the empty room. Please, dad, father, don't let me die. Gee, give me strength, don't, please, don't ignore me. I'm sorry. The hours had passed slowly for Dean. Everything hurt. Every ache, every sore muscle and gaping wound. He coughed up another mouthful of blood onto the floor. He watched how the fire reflected off the fresh splatter and wondered if Bobby would be angry with him for getting the floor so dirty. Humans worried about that sort of thing. He hadn't moved since had been left alone, too afraid of using any more energy than was required to keep his body from dying. Footsteps echoed through the basement and Dean wondered if Sam was coming back to yell at him. He certainly deserved it. There was a sharp intake of breath and slowly Dean raised his head to find Bobby staring in disgust. Jesus, kid, pull yourself together. Bobby shouted. He stumbled when the ground beneath him shook. He looked up in time to catch Dean's angry glare switch to pure panic. Dean spat up more blood and whined lowly as he curled more into himself. That was it. There wasn't much left anymore. He wouldn't be able to keep his vessel alive any longer. Maybe a couple hours if he was lucky. Slowly, he looked up at Bobby. Sorry, he whispered. Bobby grimaced as his eyes took in the damage Dean has caused to himself. Nothing to be sorry for, just you'd better and well talk, he said. Why don't you heal yourself? Dean shrugged. Can't anymore, I never got to thank you, Dean said, breaking off in a ragged cough. For what? Bobby asked, not bothering to hide the suspicion in his voice. You were more of a father to me than John ever was, Dean replied. He looked back at the floor and shook his head. You playing catch instead of teaching me to shoot. That was probably the best day of my childhood for the first time since Mary Mom you helped ease the pain. Bobby's eyes softened. Someone had to take care of you kids. Dean doubled over in another coughing fit. He moaned loudly as he pulled his wings in tight. They hurt so much. It wasn't the familiar burn of the fire. And it was much more intense than the last time they were sore. Is there something I can get you? Bobby asked. Within reason. Dean shook his head, wiping his mouth with his hand. Tombstone. Want me to pipe in some music? Dean looked up. Too old mind hey Jude if you got it, he replied, barely above a whisper. Bobby nodded and turned to leave. I'll see what I can do. Dean watched Bobby disappear back upstairs and sighed. He felt so useless. They were in the middle of the apocalypse and his supposed friends had him locked away. Why couldn't they have waited? Because they love me, Dean muttered to himself, finally able to properly break from the demonic energies clouding his thoughts. He still craved more, desperately wanted to break out and hunt down a demon, but he was finally far enough along to ignore it. The last time he had come down from his demon high, he sulked for over 4 centuries. He wondered what he would do this time around. He could already feel the sorrow and loneliness closing in on him, suffocating his will. It was early the next morning when a high-pitched noise drifted up from the basement. Sam and Bobby looked around in confusion as the sound grew higher and louder. The windows began to vibrate and the lights flickered. The hell is that? Bobby shouted, covering his ears. He looked over to see Castile staring at nothing, a soft smile on his face. Sam cringed, trying to block out the noise. Is it Dean? Castile nodded as windows burst in their frames and light bulbs popped. Beside him, the TV exploded into the room, but he didn't notice, too wrapped up in listening to the beautiful song. He had heard stories about the seraphim and how their voices were the most wondrous sound to grace existence. He had never thought nor hoped to actually hear one sing. The song faded into more of a low hum, and Castile turned to face Sam and Bobby. He frowned at the pained expressions the humans wore. He was singing, he explained. You may not fully understand, but oh hear Dean Seraphiel sing, no experience could compare. Sam winced as he looked around. The sound wasn't as loud as before, but it was just as persistent. A high-pitched whine, just on the edge of human hearing. Sorry, cause, but can you make him stop? He asked. Bobby nodded in agreement, sticking his fingers in his ears and back out. It's annoying, and it hurts. Castile sighed heavily and nodded. Yes. Humans do have difficulty with our real voices. I'll ask him to stop. He may not be in his body, so I suggest the two of you remain up here, he said before vanishing to the basement. He reappeared just outside the panic room and stared at the sight that greeted him. Dean's body lay lifeless in the middle of the floor. Curled protectively around it was Seraphiel, humming softly as he petted his vessel's cheek with the tip of his tail. Castile stared in awe. None of the stories did the older angle justice. The inner light from his grace was dim, certainly not enough to overpower the light cast by the holy fire. His wyvern-shaped body was sleek with scales that glittered like the night sky and spotted, his belly shone brightly in the palest hue of blue, the same color as the feathers shaping his ears. Castile could just imagine what the blood-red wings would have looked like untouched. He looked at the pointed talons that had ripped into so many of their brothers and sisters, dull and lifeless without any power behind them. His gaze followed the burning mane that ran the serpentine length of Seraphiel's body and rested on the tip of the tail. A small, hollow space was all that remained of where Seraphiel's blade had been held. Without Seraphiel blocking him, Castile could judge the other angel's true size, and he was small. Smaller than any other angel he had met. Small, swift, and deadly. He finally understood how one angel could have caused so much damage. Why did you let them do this to you? Castile whispered. You could have escaped. Fought them off. Seraphiel's head shot up and bright green eyes stared. Hundreds of glittering eyes of varying shades of green opened along his body, each zeroing in on Castile. He ducked his head and looked away. Because father commanded it, he quietly replied. He winced as the fan above him shook from his voice. Castile frowned and tilted his head, quickly translating the older Enochian dialect. How are you feeling? Seraphiel nudged his vessel with his long snout. I can't fix it, he said. He looked back up at Castile. I kept it alive as long as I could, but I don't even have the power to keep a corpse moving. If you wanted to kill me, now would be the best time. With a wave of his hand, Castile lowered the flames. He stepped into the room and Seraphiel struggled to stand. He watched sadly as Seraphiel scurried away and huddled against the wall. He approached the vessel and knelt down, giving it all his attention as he placed his hand on it. He looked up when he heard the soft click of claws on the floor. He smiled reassuringly at Seraphiel's curious look. "You are not getting rid of me?" Seraphiel asked. "Of course not, Dean," Castile replied. His smile widened as Seraphiel gave an excited flap of his wings and a delighted giggle. Seraphiel's grace slammed into him, filling him with love and thankfulness. Castiel breathed out a sigh of relief as he focused back on Dean's body. It had worked. Seraphiel's grace was void of demonic energies. There was still the taint of hell and sin, but it was purely Seraphiel. His grace felt lighter, brighter, and full of so many interesting promises. Castiel glanced up from healing Dean's body. He blushed at the prone position Seraphiel had taken. Seraphiel was stretched out on his back, exposing his pale stomach to Castiel. His wings were spread out, framing him and what he had to offer. His tail curled and flicked excitedly as he held Castiel's stare. Castiel couldn't keep his eyes from wandering over Seraphiel's body. He could easily imagine himself wrapping his own body around Seraphiel, nibbling on feathered ears. Finally, his eyes rested on the red wings, a glint of bright pale blue shining out from the smallest stump. That hadn't been there before. Not that he could recall. He remembered the pale feather in his pocket, his reminder that Seraphiel was worth redeeming. "Oh yeah, sorry," Seraphiel quickly apologized, folding his wings and rolling over into a sitting position. He stared at the floor as he pulled his grace away from Castiel's. I thought maybe I dunno." Castiel reached out for Seraphiel's grace and tightly embraced it. "No, I'm sorry," he said. "I wasn't expecting, certainly not from someone of your ranking." Seraphiel snorted and shook his head, sending a flashing wave down his mane. "What rank?" he bitterly replied. Castiel stood and gestured to the body on the floor. "Everything is as it should be," he said. "Dean, I would be honored." A blinding flash filled the basement as Seraphiel reclaimed his vessel. Castiel watched as Dean took stock of his body. He had done well repairing the damage Dean had caused. Dean tried to pull himself up but found he didn't have the strength. He gave up and stared up at Castiel with unfocused eyes. He had no power and his vessel had no residual energy of its own. "How do you feel?" Castiel asked. "Dead," Dean slurred. "Numbungry. Haven't eaten since yesterday." "You shouldn't need to." "You might not need to eat, but I do," Dean said, cutting Castiel off. "Especially when I'm this low I can't power my body on my own." "I would offer to help, you don't want anything but your own power to be flowing through you," Castiel said. He traced his fingers along Dean's jaw and to his lips. Really do think this will work?" Dean let his eyes fall shut. He panicked when the feeling of sleep began to pull on him. His eyes flew open and he reached desperately for Castiel. He clung onto Castiel's arm as his heart raced. "I don't want to fall asleep," he whispered. "Not now yet, I need to talk to Sam first." His eyes were wide and pleading as he stared at Castiel. "I can't be out of it when I not with the way I left things." Castiel nodded and pulled Dean's arm over his shoulder as he helped Dean to stand. "Very well. But after, you need to rest." The pair slowly made their way upstairs, Dean constantly shaking his head to avoid sleep. "Need some coffee," he mumbled as they reached the landing and started down the hall to the study. Sam stood and rushed to Dean's side the moment they entered the room. "Dean. Are you okay? Are you sane?" Dean replied. "Yeah, I guess so, tired as fuck. And hungry." "Here's a tombstone in the freezer," Bobby said. "Help yourself when you're ready." Dean squinted at Bobby in confusion before remembering what he had said earlier. "Oh huh. Good one," he mumbled. Sam pulled a face at the reminder of what Dean had done, his eyes traveling over his brother's neck to make sure there was no lingering damage. Dean caught Sam's stare and looked away. "Sorry about earlier, I can say it was all a lie. But too, I'm sorry you had to find out about it that way." Sam nodded awkwardly. Are you sure she's in heaven?" he quietly asked. Dean's eyes flicked up to Sam. "Yeah. So like that when you, die well so me and can take you see her. Between me and Kaz, we're bound to know someone that be willing to help out and give directions." Sam's eyes widened and he looked away. "Thanks. I guess." He looked back at Dean when a soft snore answered him. He shook his head as he looked over Dean's body. The blood stains on Dean's jeans were the only evidence of what had happened. Is he gonna be okay? Castiel adjusted his grip on Dean. "I think a month would be enough time for him to regain a minimal amount of energy. He should be able to tap into heaven by then," he replied. "So Hess out of commission until then?" Bobby asked. He huffed a Castiel's short nod. "Shit, we got a call from Ellen while you were down there. Looks like it's just you and me, Sam." He glanced at Castiel, measuring him up. "Unless you wanna lend a hand. Someone should keep an eye on Dean." "In my experience, Hess impatient," Castiel said, earning an agreeing grunt from Bobby. "He may not be able to fly or use his power, Beauty still would not trust him being left alone." "Then stay by the phone," Bobby said as he motioned for Castiel to follow him. Castiel handed Dean over to Sam before following Bobby into the kitchen and to the set of labeled phones. "Do not answer any of these. They're already set up with voicemail, so don't worry about it. Dean can answer when Hess awake. The only one you need to worry about is this one," Bobby said as he placed a cordless phone into Castiel's hand. You do know how to answer a phone, right? I've seen it done, yes. Good. If we end up in over our heads, you lock him up and come help. Got it. Castiel narrowed his eyes at Bobby, but nodded nonetheless. Dean struggled to prop himself up on his elbows. A wave of dizziness hit him and he clenched his eyes shut, riding out the sensation. He felt so numb and empty. It was a strange feeling for his Grace, considering how much his wings hurt. He brought them out and slowly unfolded them, wincing at how sore and stiff they were. He breathed a sigh when he managed to stretch them out and work out a little of the stiffness. Looking around, he recognized the room he was in as Bobby's guest room. He tried to speak, but all that came out was a tired croak. He cleared his throat and tried again. Sam? Sammy? He called, frowning when he didn't hear Sam's footsteps rushing to meet him. "They're helping Ellen," Castiel replied as he entered the room, carrying a glass of water. He smiled as he caught sight of Dean's wings. "What happened?" Dean asked. He took the glass and it immediately slipped out of his fingers. He sighed in irritation and let himself drop back onto the bed. "I believe they're up against war," Castiel said as he sat on the edge of the bed. He bent over and picked the empty glass off the ground, then set it on the nightstand. "War as in war. Apocalypse war. 4 fucking horsemen war." Dean rolled to his side and tried to push himself up. He grunted when Castiel pressed him back down. "Cause, I have to help them." "The best way for you to help them is to get rest," Castiel said. He touched Dean's cheek and brushed against Dean's Grace, sending him reassurance. "I'm fine," Dean insisted. "If it really is war, then the rest won't be far behind. I can't just let them. We can do your stupid tap into heaven test after the apocalypse. Cause, I gotta help them. Gotta keep Sam safe." Dean watched helplessly as Castiel got off the bed and stretched his wings. In his current state, he was having trouble focusing. His mind jumped between thoughts of needing to keep Sam safe and taking Castiel into his arms. He reached out, pleading with his Grace. He wasn't shut out, but he couldn't glean any thoughts from the other angel. "Casplia." Dean gasped as Castiel appeared on top of him, his fingers digging deeply into his shoulders. Castiel's wings were flared out in a sign of domination. He stared up at Castiel, his breaths coming in shallow puffs. He couldn't help it as his wings curved forward to brush against Castiel's. He gave an uncertain smile as Castiel shuddered above him. 2 days ago, you were submitting to me," Castiel said calmly. "Is that what you want, or did you change your mind?" Dean blinked up at Castiel. 2 days. He panicked and pushed to Castiel with his Grace, only to find his Grace being held as gently as possible by Castiel's. "I have to." Dean tried to wriggle away, but Castiel's grip tightened. "I'm not asking for you to obey, Dean," Castiel said gruffly. "But I do need you to listen." He gave a harsh beat of his wings before stretching them back out. Dean sucked in a shaky breath and shivered, his eyes drifting back to Castiel's wings. The last time he had submitted himself to another angel was with Lucifer. He wanted this so much. He had thrown himself at Castiel earlier, willing to completely give himself over. Did he know what he was doing? Submitting to such a low-ranking angel? Even Castiel had thought it was strange. But nowhere Castiel was, hovering above him, reminding Dean of what they would be entering into. He had been in a similar, more formal, position with Lucifer. He joined with Lucifer. Rebelled for him. Killed for him. Stood by his every choice, even when he thought there were better ones. Certainly, Lucifer's first choice in a companion would have been better than Seraphiel. Definitely more vocal about his opinions than Seraphiel had been. But Seraphiel had been made for Lucifer. He was the consolation prize, but he never let it get to him. Too much. He had always stood by Lucifer's side and decisions. If he did it for Lucifer, could he do so for Castiel? Castiel had already fallen for him. He gave up heaven. Seraphiel had done the same for Lucifer, but he was turned away. Forced to return home and receive his punishment. He couldn't turn Castiel away. Couldn't force Castiel to be on the run alone. Not when things in heaven were so messed up. But he also had to make sure that Sam was safe with his own eyes. He whined as Castiel shifted and placed a knee between his legs, forcing them apart. He panted as he spread his legs for Castiel and arched his back. He squirmed under Castiel, moaning for more as Castiel's Grace pulsed against him. He cried out when Castiel ground against him. "Will you listen to me?" Castiel asked huskily into Dean's ear. Dean nodded, writhing under Castiel. "I'll listen," he replied. "No promises, but listen." He moaned loudly when Castiel's teeth ghosted over his neck, imitating what they would do in their true forms. He bared his neck, trying to remain still as Castiel kissed and licked his way to Dean's collarbone. "Do you submit to me?" Castiel whispered. He frowned when Dean freed a shoulder from his grasp. Dean's hand grabbed him by the back of the head and he was forced back up to meet Dean's face. "Sir Dean." Dean breathed raggedly, surprised by his sudden surge of energy. It was fading quickly, so he used his time as wisely as he could. No, he grunted, stamping down the heartbreak he felt at Castiel's sorrow. No, not this time. We stand as equals. We submit to each other or not at all. He held his breath as his eyes flicked between Castiel's. No other angel had done such a thing. In heaven, it was all about rank. Obeying. Following. But they were on earth. They didn't have to follow heaven's rules. Not that Seraphiel was any good at that anyway. Castiel caught Dean's thoughts through his grace and swallowed. Slowly, he reached up and tugged at his tie, then moved his collar aside. He let his eyes fall shut as Dean pressed his lips against his collarbone, his grace searing into Castiel's, leaving a bright burning mark behind. Dean clung to Castiel, rubbing against him as the young angel made his way back down his neck. Oh, God. In the moment of pain and bliss, Dean's grace was marked by Castiel. He didn't know how he felt about Castiel leaving Lucifer's own mark untouched. Because it's a part of you, and I love every part, Castiel whispered. His body gave out, and he collapsed back against the bed, blinking slowly at Castiel. You wouldn't hate me for still loving him? He asked weakly. Castiel leaned down, placing a soft kiss on Dean's lips. He let his wings relax. No. Father filled you with so much love. There was plenty for everyone. And I know you don't love him in that way. Not anymore. His grace sifted through Dean, leaving traces of love in every corner. I know you are still worried about Sam. Believe me, if anything happens, I'll take care of it, he promised. I won't let anything happen to your brother. Dean swallowed as he nodded. As much as Castiel meant it, he was no match against War. Or any of the horsemen. They were old school. Castiel was Castiel. At least Dean had some previous experience with them. Can I get some food? He asked. Castiel nodded and quickly removed himself from Dean. Dean watched as Castiel disappeared into the hallway. He had about a minute. With everything he had, he pulled himself out of the bed and made his way to the window. He caught his breath before unlocking the latch and lifting the window up. Leaning over the windowsill, he eyed the ground. Would he be able to land safely? Did he have enough strength to slow his fall? He brought his knee up and began climbing out the window when a light pressure touched the back of his head. Dean's head snapped around. No one was behind him. He cautiously reached out, finding Castiel was still in the kitchen. He grinned and jumped out the window, landing heavily on the ground below. He grinned to himself as he hurried around the corner of the house and to his car. Which was not where it was supposed to be. In the Impala's place was a large pumpkin-shaped carriage. Dean's wings and shoulders slumped in defeat as an obscenely pink and green flamingo skated by. Oh, fuck you. He glared at the carriage. Might as well make the most of this, he said as he opened the door and climbed inside. He grinned as his eyes traveled over his concocted dream Castiel, dressed up in a red corset and devil horns. He straddled his dream Castiel's lap and fingered the horn headband. This kinda suits you. Castiel raised his brow and cocked his head to the side. I may have fallen, but I have yet to join the ranks of hell, he replied. Or understand why you have me wearing this costume. Dean frowned as he stared at Castiel. Yeah, are you? You are here. Castiel nodded, his grace brushing against Dean. Partly. You zapped me, Dean said in a light, accusing tone. You need to rest. Dean ran his hands over Castiel's chest, not quite feeling the fabric of the corset. He tried to wake himself up, but could feel Castiel's power keeping him unconscious. Tell you what. I'll rest if you go help Sam. Right now. He glanced up when he didn't hear an answer. He reached out to find that his dream Castiel was just a dream. A small plea drifted through his grace, begging him to stay asleep. He didn't know if it got through, but he sent a reply with everything he knew about War, just as Dream Castiel pulled him forward and began nibbling on his ear. Castiel was right. He could use a few minutes of rest. Or an hour. Dream Castiel pushed Dean to the floor and started nuzzling his crotch. Definitely an hour. Dean was slow to wake. As much as he wanted to stay asleep, he wanted nothing to do with the dream he just had. Reliving his exile from heaven was not on the top of his to-do list. He reached out with his senses to check if anyone had returned. He could feel Bobby downstairs, but nothing else. The sound of a page in a book being turned alerted him to a presence next to him. He turned his head and smiled at the sight of Sam sitting on a chair next to his bed, reading a book. You're okay, he said with a rough, but relieved, voice. Sam jumped and looked up. Dean. He stood and went straight to Dean's side, helping his brother to sit up. Hey, careful. Don't stress yourself. I'm good, Dean said after clearing his throat. I'm kinda hard to kill. But what about you? And Bobby? What happened? Yeah, it was a little more than we were expecting, Sam replied. Butte stopped him. We got War's ring. Dean felt lightheaded as Sam let go of him, and he swayed slightly as he laughed. What you do? Chop his hand off. He said jokingly. Sam laughed and looked away, giving a small nod and shrug. Seriously? Awesome, Dean said. As he became more awake, he became more aware of the gnawing hunger in his stomach. He frowned, ignoring the sensation. Did it cause help? Yeah. He was a big help, actually, Sam replied. Probably would have been even more casualties if he hadn't shown up. He saw right through War's disguise and tricks. Dean smiled as he looked around the room. Good. Where is he? He asked. He reached out as far as he could with his grace, but found no trace of Castiel. Where is he? He repeated, panicked. He tried to push himself out of bed, but a wave of dizziness hit him, and he fell over. Sam caught Dean and forced him to stay on the bed. Hess out looking for signs of the other horsemen, he explained. Dean nodded, and he continued. Hess got my phone. He wanted you to call when you woke up. Didn't think to wake me up when he was here. Dean asked in confusion. We won't he? He wanted you to get as much rest as possible, so how are you doing? Sam asked. I'm fine, Dean replied. Why wasn't Castiel by his side? What did he do now to upset the angel? Dean rolled his eyes with a heavy sigh. I'm fine, he insisted. I'm sore, I'm tired, and I'm fucking starving. Otherwise, I'm fine. Happy. Not really, Sam admitted. I can help with the starving part. Bobby's got some takeout waiting. You want me to bring it up? Dean nodded, his mind going straight to Castiel. And my phone. Sam smiled and reached into his coat pocket, retrieving Dean's phone. He handed it over and chewed the inside of his cheek as Dean took it. "You have a few missed calls," he said. "Same number, but no message." Dean stared at the phone. He had a pretty good idea about who had been calling him. He knew that he should probably tell Sam. Castiel, too. Especially if he was trying to turn over a new leaf and be honest with Sam, not run into all of the same problems all over again. He didn't need Meg to be what Ruby was to Sam. And wasn't he planning on telling Sam anyway? Before he had been distracted. "Sam, I made a deal with Meg," he said shakily. He glanced up and Sam was just staring at him with no expression. He quickly looked back down at his phone. "She's working with Lucifer and I have it so she can't say anything about us to him or hurt anyone we know. It's a good deal. I wrote the contract myself. It's just running messages back and forth. That's all. Nothing that would." "I know," Sam said quietly. Dean's head shot up and he had to clench his eyes shut as his dizziness was joined by a sudden headache. Being without any power whatsoever sucked. "Bobby told me. It's also why Castiel isn't here," Sam said, looking away uncomfortably. He was a little upset. "A little," Dean said with a small bitter laugh. I still love him. I'm sorry, I want to believe that I can get through to him. That hell, listen. I guess what cause is Trent to do with me." He buried his head in his hands as the realization hit him. "God, I'm so fucking stupid." Sam squeezed Dean's shoulder. "It'll bring you up some food. You should make your calls," he said. Dean sighed as he listened to Sam leave the room and head down the hall. As much as he wanted to call Meg first, he really needed to call Castiel and come clean. He clutched at the blankets on the bed as he waited for Castiel to answer. "Hello, Dean. I'm sorry I didn't tell you," Dean said in a rush. "Are you?" Castiel asked, the irritation clear in his voice. "Yes," Dean quietly replied. "Tu told Sammy. And he said you already knew. Said Bobby told you guys." His heart beat quickly as he waited for Castiel to respond. As the silence dragged on, Dean began to feel panic settle over him. "You told him?" "Yeah, I don't want a ton of secrets in the way," Dean said. He closed his eyes and groaned softly as his headache seemed to intensify. "I know I don't make the best decisions, but to need you guys to trust me. Connie can show you the contract. I promise Meg can't reveal our location to Lucifer." "I know," Castiel replied, appearing beside Dean. Dean opened his eyes and stared up at Castiel. He lightly touched Castiel's grace with his own and relaxed when Castiel sat on the bed, wrapping Dean in his grace. "I looked through your grace while you were asleep," Castiel said, looking away. "I was upset when Bobby told me about Meg." Dean frowned as he flitted through Castiel's grace, finding bits of guilt and regret. "Cass, it's okay," Dean said as he leaned forward and placed his hand on Castiel's shoulder. "You had every right. Tu should have told you guys sooner. Well, at least Sam. You were akin to dead at the time." Castiel laughed softly. "Yes. I suppose you haven't had much time to tell me. Yeah, I think I was Jonathan for a demon and you were dead and Shesh knew how to get in touch with Lucifer," Dean said. "To know I've said it before, beauty do believe Hess worth saving. That he can be saved." Castiel nodded, reminding Dean along their entwined graces that he felt the same way about Dean. "But, more importantly than your deal with Meg, does Sam know?" he asked. He poked through Dean's grace and focused his attention on Dean's knowledge of Lucifer's true vessel. Dean's eyes were wide as he shook his head. He stopped and clutched his head, shutting his eyes tightly. Tu wanted to stop this. Before he had to find out. "You should tell him," Castiel said. He scooted closer to Dean and ran his fingers through Dean's hair. Has had enough bad news, Dean argued, leaning into the touch. Dean deserves to know. He deserves to be prepared, Castiel pointed out. But. Seraphiel. Dean flinched away and ducked his head. He was still torn between loving hearing his name on Castiel's lips and hating the reminder of who he used to be. He shifted his wings restlessly, wincing at the soreness that had returned. You wish to be open and honest with your brother? Castiel asked. He waited for Dean to nod. Then you must tell him. Dean looked up at Castiel, the misery he felt clear on his face. He shuddered as Castiel's grace gently caressed him. I've done so much to protect him. And now he needs the knowledge that will allow him to protect himself, Castiel said. He stretched out a wing and let it settle against Dean's wings. Dean nodded as he breathed in shakily. I'll tell him, he whispered. He looked over as Sam entered the room, holding a tray of food. He took a few breaths, bracing himself for Sam's reaction. Sammy. I need to tell you something. Something real important. What's that? Sam asked. Dean eyed the tray for a moment. You might want to sit down. Sam shook his head. Whatever it is, I think I can handle it. Not this. Dean. You're Lucifer's true vessel, Dean said. He winced as the tray and food Sam had been holding clattered loudly to the ground. The sound was loud in his ears and made his head pound even more. Through the pain, he felt his stomach growl and wondered if he would ever get the chance to eat. What? No, Sam slowly sank into the chair beside Dean's bed. It's impossible. I'm sorry, Dean whispered. He was barely aware of Castiel's grace sending him bursts of encouragement. How long? How long have you known? Sam asked, staring at the floor. Dean didn't answer right away. Since before I claimed this vessel. A pair of brothers. The eldest for Michael. The youngest for Lucifer. At first, I thought it was just the true start of the bloodlines, but too many coincidences. No one was supposed to know, he explained. His anxiety and fear kicked up when Sam failed to react. Not even all of heaven knows, Castiel added. For most of my time working under Zachariah, I had no idea about Michael's true vessel. Don't I need to think about this, Sam said. His eyes darted across the floor as he digested the new information. Sammy. Dean reached his hand out to Sam, only to have it smacked away. No. Don't. Right now, you're just Seraphiel. An angel that's obsessed with his ex. I can't deal with this right now. Sam finally looked up to stare at Dean. You were never gonna tell me, were you? Dean looked away, clutching his hand to his chest and shaking. His eyes were having trouble focusing. I'm sorry, he whispered. Have you learned nothing? Sam asked in disbelief. That's why I told you. Why I told you about Meg. Dean cried out. I could have lied. I could have. He leaned forward, resting his weight against Castiel. He felt sick to his stomach and he felt stranger than he ever had before. Sam's expression softened as he leaned back in his chair. Dean. I'm trying. I've always tried to do good by you. I've protected you. Looked out for you when Dad couldn't be bothered. Dean shouted as he forced himself to sit up and face Sam. He couldn't focus his eyes or his mind. To Sammy. I just. Dean. Sam jumped out of his chair as Dean fell over. Castiel wrapped his arms around Dean, keeping him from falling off the bed. He looked up at Sam in bewilderment. What's wrong? Sam asked as he took Dean's face in his hands and looked over his brother. What happened? I am not entirely certain, Castiel admitted. What panic rose in Sam. I think Castiel brushed his grace along Dean's and sighed in relief when Dean responded in a state of panic. That's all right. He just passed out. He should regain consciousness shortly and I suggest he actually eats something when he does. Sam sagged heavily into the chair and ran his hand through his hair. This is too much. He looked up when Castiel laughed and gave the angel a quizzical look. What? Dean has never experienced this before, Castiel replied. That's quite frantic. Good, Sam said as he crossed his arms. So what do I do? About me being Lucifer's vessel, I mean. Castiel looked at Sam and tilted his head slightly. Just say no when he asks you to accept him. That's all. Sam's brows came together as he shook his head. There has to be more to it than that. Castiel shook his head and looked back down at Dean as he held him. An angel cannot take over without their vessel's permission. Because of his corruption, Dean is the exception. But isn't Lucifer just as corrupted as Dean? Sam asked. I shouldn't think so, Castiel quietly replied. Lucifer wouldn't have been able to get up to as much trouble as Dean did. Not while he was locked in the cage. Lucifer is still all angel. Dean is a very strange mix. Not many angels have spent so long amongst humans. Nor done the things that Dean has done. Dean, as long I don't say yes, Lucifer will never have his true vessel. Castiel nodded. So I don't say yes. Dean was miserable. Castiel was off again, doing God knows what, and Sam and Bobby were treating him like he was a fragile doll. He had to be propped up since he had no strength of his own to sit up. His vessel was running on empty and his grace was struggling to keep his body awake long enough to even drink. It was bad enough that he needed help with everything, but there was a special hatred for the straw. He felt so humiliated by the fact that Sam had to hold out a glass with a straw for him to drink from. "I hate this," he slurred as Sam offered the glass again. "You only have yourself to blame," Sam pointed out. "Cause says your body will take over once it's nourished." Dean stared at the glass and sighed. "Yeah, upkeep's minimal when you're healthy. So get healthy," Sam said with an encouraging smile, once more lifting the glass. He smiled as Dean finally took a drink. Your phone rang while you were sleeping," he said eventually. Dean visibly stiffened and glanced sideways at Sam. "Yeah. I still don't like it." "I know," Dean said quietly. Sam watched Dean for a moment before speaking up again. "Do you want me to call her back?" he asked. Dean slowly shook his head and winced. "No, the contract's with me. She won't be able to tell you anything and she'd probably just hang up on you to avoid pissing me off." Sam pulled Dean's phone out of his pocket and set it on Dean's lap. "Well, it's there when you can lift it," he said, his voice bordering on joking. Dean gave a short laugh. "That might take a while." "Should I hope?" He trailed off and stared at the phone. He reached out with his grace, hoping to find a sign of Castiel's return. He could use the reassurance. "I can probably do speakerphone, but..." Sam squeezed Dean's shoulder as he stood. "It'll give you some privacy," he said and picked up Dean's phone. He dialed the number that had been calling once every few hours. "You don't have to. This kinda involves you, too," he said quietly as the phone rang. He was full of apprehension as Sam sat back down, setting the phone back on Dean's lap. "Seraphiel." The relief in Meg's voice was hard to miss. "Hey, Meg," Dean greeted. "Heard you were trying to get hold of me. Where the hell have you been? It's been days." "I had some things to take care of," he replied. "So what did you need?" "Lucifer's been re-aiming my ass about you. He wants you with him." "I can't do that, Meg," he said with a sigh. He glanced at Sam for support and immediately looked away. The frown Sam was sporting was all he needed to see to know Sam's thoughts on that matter. "Not to join him," Meg quickly assured. He asked how you looked and too I told him about your wings, he didn't take it well. He knew they were red and torn, but he didn't know just how fucked up they are." "He wants you with him so he can protect you," Meg said quietly. "I can protect myself," Dean shouted angrily. He flinched when Sam lightly touched his arm. "I've been on my own since I don't need." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "He thought you might be stubborn about that so he wants to know who it was," Meg said. "There was more than one responsible," Dean bit out. "What's he gonna do? March up to heaven and hunt down every angel that ever looked at me wrong? Given the chance. No. Tell him I'm fine. I've adapted. I don't need his pity. I don't need him to be my vengeance. When I do eventually see him I just want him to listen," Dean said, ending in whisper. "And when might that be?" "I don't know. Not anytime soon. I need time to myself." "Alright. I'll let him know. And, Seraphiel." "Yeah? Please. Please answer your phone sooner. And make any promises," Dean said with a smile. He nodded for Sam to hang up the phone. "That went well." Sam furrowed his brows and thinned his lips. "You're not gonna go back to him, are you?" he asked, not looking at Dean. Dean looked over at Sam. "No. I want to, but no." He offered a grim smile when Sam met his eyes. "It's hard, Sammy. Hess right there. Closest Hess been in millennia. But 'cause makes it easier. If I didn't have him, I think I probably would go running back, eventually. If only to keep him from coming after you. Said all I have to do is say no." "Lucifer he can be pretty convincing," Dean said softly. "I didn't want to rebel. Didn't think it was right. But I still stood by him. Still agreed to do it. Half of us that rebelled who didn't think it was the best option, but we still did it. He didn't trick us. Didn't lie. We knew what we were doing." "It'll never be his vessel," Sam promised. He paled at the sad look Dean gave him. "And I swore I'd never rebel for such a stupid reason." The weeks wore on and Dean slowly gained his strength back. As Bobby used his contacts to hunt down signs of Lucifer and the Horseman, Castiel bounced in and out on a self-imposed mission to locate God. Dean had tried to point out that it was futile. If their father didn't want to be found, then it was useless. Castiel was growing frustrated. Dean may have been regaining his strength, but it only made him more of a handful. Every time he returned to Bobby's house to check in, Dean would try to coax him into bed. Dean's vessel may have gotten its strength back, but the angel's grace had yet to regain any true power. Certainly not enough to be properly intimate. Dean had tried to convince Castiel that human intimacy was just as good. When Castiel finally relented, their session ended almost as soon as it had started. The moment Castiel had touched Dean's wings with his own, the other angel had hissed and pulled back sharply. It had thrown Dean into a depression, and Castiel was uncertain if he should mention that the reason for Dean's aches and pains was due to the new growth of fresh, shimmering feathers. He decided to keep it to himself after peeking into Dean's grace and seeing how sensitive Dean was about his wings. Especially when he happened upon the memory of Seraphiel picking out every remaining clean feather in a fit of remorse. The other half of Castiel's frustration was coming from his inability to find their father. He had gone so far as to sneak back into heaven for information, but he had found nothing. None of his contacts knew anything. In a stroke of luck, he did locate Seraphiel's blade. He was surprised at how unguarded the forgotten relic was. Not to ignore the opportunity, he secreted it away, intent on returning it to its rightful owner when Seraphiel was able to call upon heaven's power once again. In his frustration, he had tracked down Raphael, certain that the Archangel would know something. The information he had received was less than comforting. It was with that information that Castiel returned to the hunter's house to find Sam and Dean in the living room, researching omens. Sam sat at the desk with his laptop and Dean was sprawled over half the couch with a heavy book, flipping back and forth between pages. Neither looked up from what they were doing, but Dean did lightly graze Castiel's grace. Dean looked up from the book he was flipping through when Castiel's grace desperately clung to his own. Cause, what's wrong? Castiel dropped heavily onto the couch next to Dean. I spoke with Raphael, he confessed. He felt Dean's alarm rise and the gentle prods against his grace, looking for any damage. He shook his head and placed his hand on Dean's thigh. I'm fine. I am unharmed. He may be upset when he finally gets out though. You trapped him in holy oil, huh? Castiel nodded and looked up, catching Sam's curious gaze. Raphael claims that God is dead. Dean scoffed as he leaned back. That son of a bitch is an idiot. Who else brought you back, huh? What was that light that got me to the plane? What other explanation is there? Castiel shifted his gaze to Dean. Lucifer, he said above a whisper. Next to him, Dean stiffened, suddenly retracting his grace. What if Lucifer brought me back? Raphael had a compelling argument. Lucifer would want fallen angels for his army. And he would certainly want to keep Sam safe. Sam shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I don't think I was ever in any danger at the chapel, he said, pulling Dean and Castiel's attention to himself. I've been turning up in my dreams. He doesn't know where we are, does he? Dean asked, sitting up straight. Sam shook his head. He seems convinced that I'm gonna let him take over, though. Dean sighed as he relaxed. Just be careful, Sam. We can try finding some warding that'll keep him out of your head. He shifted his attention back to Castiel. As for you, I don't think Lucifer has the power to bring you back. I might have been able to pull that off in my heyday, but he won't be able to. If he did manage to bring you back, it would just be a cheap copy. Like Lilith was. You won't be an angel. You won't be you. Castiel nodded stiffly. He felt better. Much better. Especially with Dean's grace flitting through his own, leaving weak but bright blasts of love and reassurance. He closed his eyes and let Dean's grace wrap around him. He breathed in slowly as Dean leaned over and kissed his neck. A cough drew his attention and he opened his eyes to see Sam looking at the pair uncomfortably. You don't have to stay, Dean pointed out as he continued to kiss at Castiel's neck. He smiled at Sam's disgusted grunt and listened as his brother stomped out of the room and down the hall. Dean pushed against Castiel and brought his wings out. They were still sore to the touch, but he was willing to put up with a little discomfort to be with Castiel. He paused in his exploration of Castiel's mouth at the look of wonder he was receiving. What? Castiel shook his head dismissively and pulled Dean back down. You're just so beautiful. Dean flexed his wings, feeling the phantom pains of limbs that no longer existed. No, I'm not. Braces thoroughly entwined, Castiel lightly placed his hands on Dean's cheeks and kissed him. Yes, you are, Seraphiel, he said. You are the most beautiful angel I have ever seen. I've never seen Lucifer. I've seen him in your memories and, to me, you are far more beautiful, Castiel said, placing another loving kiss. Enough talk. I shouldn't stay long. Raphael will come after me and it would be best if he didn't find out where you and your brother are. Dean didn't have to be told twice. He pulled at Castiel's clothing and set to work on undoing Castiel's pants. In a flash, they were on the bed that Dean had been occupying for the past few weeks. Dean grunted as he shook his head. He sent a reprimanding flash through his grace and set back to work on removing Castiel's clothing. Been looking forward to this, he moaned. Castiel gasped and squirmed as Dean kissed his way down, his eagerness bleeding through his grace. He lightly grasped Dean's hair as a warm mouth closed around his hardening cock. Oh. He moaned softly as Dean lifted his legs to rest on the other's shoulders, too engrossed in the feeling of Dean licking and sucking at his cock and balls. Dean ah. His eyes flew open as a slick finger slowly made its way past his sphincter. What are? Dean paused and looked up. Is this okay? I can stop. Just thought you might want to try it out. Since I still don't think I can keep up grace-wise. Castiel blinked curiously as he followed Dean's thoughts. He smiled and spread his legs to give Dean better access. Yes, we can do this, he replied. His smile shifted to a leer. But I get to take care of your grace, he said. I promise it'll be gentle. Dean's breath hitched and he nodded jerkily. Why yeah, his eyes fluttered shut as Castiel's mark on his grace flared up with an intense pulse of need. He concentrated as he proceeded to work on loosening up Castiel. He faltered as he found his fingers wet with lube he had yet to grab. Eager much? Very, Castiel admitted. He ran his grace along Dean's, dipping in and out, earning faint pulses of wanton response. Dean shifted above him and as Dean positioned himself, Castiel readied. Dean slowly, gently entered Castiel, whispering soothing, loving words. When Dean's cock was fully sheathed, Castiel let loose with every bit of love and desire he could muster, piercing straight to the core of Dean's grace. Dean's arms gave out and he fell against Castiel's chest, gasping as he twitched against the young angel. He cried out in ecstasy as Castiel's grace slowly moved through his own, spreading out to touch and lap against every corner of his being, leaving bits of smug pleasure in its wake. I'm new to this, but should you be moving? Castiel asked with a teasing grin. Dean let out a short laugh and pushed himself back up. Yeah. Just wasn't expecting that, he said as he began to pull out and slowly pushed back in. As he moved, Castiel's grace intensified its exploration, causing Dean to pick up the pace. See cause. Castiel ran his hand down Dean's chest as he watched Dean move above him. He pulled Dean down for a kiss and matched Dean's thrusts with burst after burst of needy desire. He wanted Dean fully and sent every selfish wish and want through to Dean. Dean groaned as his thrusts came quicker. Cause see Castiel gonna oh, fuck. Again. Castiel moved in time with Dean. His body went over the edge and he translated the physical feeling of his orgasm along his grace and pressed it gently against his mark on Seraphiel. He smiled lovingly up at Dean and moaned softly at the sensation of Dean's seed spilling into him. Dean gasped for air, his arms barely able to hold him upright. He had just experienced the most intense orgasm of his life. Both as a human and as an angel. If that was you being Gentlethano, fuck. He slowly pulled out with a soft hiss and let Castiel pull him down. He only winced a little as Castiel rolled them over and straddled his hips. He stared up at Castiel, dazed. Can we do that again? Castiel chuckled and bent down to kiss the tip of Dean's nose. Once you're better, yes. Dean frowned, his brows coming together. You're about to leave. As much as I want to, I can't stay here, Castiel replied. I would be putting you and Sam in danger. Dean sighed and nodded. Don't be a stranger, okay? Castiel left little jolts of love and happiness behind as he withdrew his grace from Dean, his smile growing wider as Dean writhed beneath him. It would be rather hard for me to be a stranger at this point. Don't you agree? Dean slapped Castiel's shoulder, grinning. I mean come back and see me sometime. I promise, Castiel swore before vanishing. Dean let out a long breath as he stared at the ceiling. He closed his eyes and stretched out his arms and brought his wings forward to work out some of the kinks. He opened his eyes to glare at his wings for hurting so much and his heart stopped. Out of the corner of his eye, he caught a flash of white. Slowly, he turned his head and saw fresh feathers, glistening with an inner light, crowning part of a limb that wasn't supposed to be there. He choked on his words as he struggled up. Oh, God. Fuck. No Sammy. Cause. Bobby. Someone. Sam and Bobby rushed into the room, expecting the worst. Dean, what's God, pull your pants back on. Dean hurriedly hoisted his jeans up and pointed over his shoulder. Something's wrong with me. Sam and Bobby exchanged confused looks. And that would be? Bobby prompted. Dean looked over his shoulder and stared at the white feathers. They're low. You can't see. The other men shook their heads. Right, Dean bit his lip as he brought a wing forward, casting shadows across the walls. He reached up and plucked one of the soft white feathers from his wing, wincing. Sam sucked in a breath as a feather materialized between his brother's fingers. Is that yours? He asked softly as he stepped closer to get a better look, Bobby right behind. But you said that I saw them. It's wrong. Dean shouted. It's my punishment. They're not supposed to grow back. They can't grow back. He flapped his wings in agitation, sending a gust of wind through the room. He released a feather and reached over his shoulder, grabbing a handful of the shimmering feathers. As he gave them a determined tug, Sam's hands clasped around his fist. He looked into Sam's worried eyes and slowly unclenched his hand. What's wrong with me? Sam gave Dean a small smile. Doesn't sound like anything's wrong, he replied. Maybe this reset's helping. Dean pulled away and held up his hand. He concentrated a small amount of the power he could muster, and his fingertips crackled with black and red energy. He let out a soft sigh, then gasped as the white sparks from before burst forth, much brighter than they had ever been. "It's not resetting my grace," he said quietly. He shook his hand out, avoiding Sam and Bobby's gaze. "What do you mean?" Bobby asked as he bent down and retrieved Dean's feather. He twisted it between his fingers, examining it. It looked like a normal white feather, but as he turned it, he could just make out an inner light that was fading. "My wings started acting up before this. My power, too. Those white sparks, Dean, it's obvious," Sam said with a soft laugh, shaking his head. "You're getting better." Dean stared at Sam as he readjusted his wings, trying to accommodate the new growth. "How is this better? This fucking hurts." "Well, maybe it's all your good deeds," Sam said, reaching for an explanation. "What good deeds?" Dean asked as he paced. "Well, I'm sure all the folks you two have helped count towards something," Bobby said. Dean gave Bobby a doubtful look. 20 years of hunting don't make up for the shit I've done. It has to be something else. Fuck. Maybe hell did something to me. You don't think I caught anything?" he asked, looking between the two men with a disgusted look. "Do angels even get diseases?" Bobby asked. Dean shook his head. "Anything that can go wrong with an angel's grace, I've already got, so I guess not that." "Maybe God's forgiven you?" Sam suggested. Dean glared at Sam. "Why doesn't he say it to my face, then? Let me go back home?" he asked angrily. "The least he could do is fucking acknowledge my existence." "Dean, why can't you ever accept anything that's good?" Sam asked. He reached out and forced Dean to stop pacing. "I said something similar once," Dean quietly admitted. "Good things just don't happen to me, Sam." "How about something to take your mind off things?" Bobby said. "I'll be honest, not sure I trust you to not fall right back into bad habits." Dean ran his hand over his face and glanced at his wings. "No, I'm good. I feel great. Really great. I can do at least as good as a human. Can get a basic read on things. Just waiting to recharge." He watched as Sam and Bobby exchanged a silent look. "I could use the distraction," he said. Sam gave Bobby a shrug. "I'll keep an eye on him." "Yeah. 'Cause you two keeping an eye on each other always works out well," Bobby scoffed. "Fine," he relented after the pathetic look Dean gave him. "You got your choice, werewolf, vamp nest, or a trickster. Which one are you least likely to snack on?" "Trickster?" Sam asked. "I thought Rufus was handling that." "Keeps giving him the slip and messin' with him," Bobby explained. "I like tricksters," Dean replied. "They're always fun." He looked at Sam with a grin. "Remember that one that made you think I died a million times?" Sam grimaced at the memories. "Yes," he bit out. "I was stuck in that time loop for." "Not a time loop," Dean cut in. "Not even angels can manipulate time. He just fucked with your head." "But it was so real," Sam said. "Hey, when I'm back up to snuff, it'll make you think you went to Woodstock." Dean caught Bobby's interested gaze. "You too, Bobby. All the hippies you could ever want." Sam shook his head, still not quite believing. "But you're telling me I've never thought a dream was real? No matter how insanely fucked up it gets?" Dean asked. "Hell, I've had that problem, and I know better." Sam glanced around the deserted area in front of the warehouse. "Do we have the right place?" he asked. Dean nodded with a wide grin. "Won't say it's a trap, but Hess definitely expecting us," he replied. "This is gonna be fun." Sam shook his head in resignation as he followed Dean up to the warehouse and through the door. And right into a hospital. He was disoriented and confused as he looked down to find himself and Dean wearing lab coats. He stared at Dean in alarm when his brother let out a delighted squeal after opening a door to a janitor's closet. But he trailed off as a familiar-looking female doctor marched up to him. He wasn't expecting it when she slapped him. "Ow. Seriously?" the doctor said. Sam glanced at her name tag. Dr. Piccolo read the tag. He didn't recognize the name. "What? Seriously?" Dr. Piccolo repeated. "You're brilliant. You know that. And a coward. You're a brilliant coward." Dean grinned happily as Sam floundered, only to be slapped again before the pretty doctor stalked off. "This is great," he said as he watched her. "What?" Sam asked, bewildered as he rubbed his cheek. "That's Dr. Piccolo," Dean explained as he pointed after the doctor. The sexy, yet earnest doctor. He paused dramatically and held his arm open to the sign behind the reception desk. "Seattle Mercy Hospital." "Dean," Sam said, getting Dean's attention. "What are you talking about?" Dean smiled at Sam. "The Dr. Jetups. The sexy interns. The Seriouslys," he explained. He sighed happily as he looked around. Maybe this trickster would be worth keeping around. He headed off in a random direction. "This is fucking awesome." "What? What's awesome? What's going on?" Sam asked as he followed Dean down a hallway. "We're in Dr. Sexy, MD." Dean excitedly replied. His smile slowly turned into a frown. Something wasn't right. Wait dude, what the hell? I don't know, Sam replied, looking through a window at a doctor making out with her patient. No, seriously, what the hell, Dean repeated as he spun around. Just on the edge of his senses was something else. If they really were dealing with a trickster, then it was a very powerful one. Quite possibly the strongest he had ever come across. I don't know, Sam said, exasperated. One theory. Any theory, Dean said, mostly to himself as his eyes caught on familiar details. The trickster trapped us in TV land, Sam said, waving to their surroundings. Dean slowly shook his head. That's stupid. You're the one who said we're on Dr. Sexy, MD, Sam pointed out. Yeah, but TV land isn't TV land. I mean, there's actors and lights and crew members. No. This looks real, Dean said, running his hand down a wall. He refrained from saying how it was messing with his senses as well. Sam caught the pause. It can't be. Dean, how can this possibly be real? He asked. I don't know, Dean muttered as a doctor walked past and greeted the brothers. There goes Dr. Wang. The sexy but arrogant heart surgeon, he said as he watched her. His eyes landed on a man sitting on a gurney at the end of the hall. And there's Johnny Drake. Oh, Hess not even alive, Hess a ghost in the mind of her. A sexy yet neurotic doctor over there, he said, pointing as a doctor sat on the gurney next to so-called ghost. This office show has ghosts? Sam asked, not hiding his confusion. Why? I don't know. It is compelling, Dean said defensively. Is this what you've been doing for the past few weeks? Sam said teasingly. No. No, of course not. Shut up. Dean looked away from Sam in embarrassment. He was torn between enjoying the illusion and doing whatever he could to tear it all down. But what could he do? What would happen if he revealed himself? Would the trickster turn tail and run? Or would it up the torment? Were they even dealing with a trickster? His thoughts came to a screeching halt as a male doctor with dark hair and stubble headed toward them. Oh boy, he breathed. He had indulged in a fantasy or two, guiding his dreams to the moment where he would get to meet Dr. Palmer. Preferably in an elevator. What? Sam asked, his eyes flicking between the approaching doctor and Dean. It's him. Who? It's him, it's Dr. Sexy, Dean said, his heart picking up in pace. Okay, so maybe he won't reveal his cards just yet. Not if it meant he got a chance to mess around with Dr. Sexy Palmer. Dr. Palmer came up to the pair of brothers and addressed Dean. Doctor. Dean smiled as he bit his lip and looked down nervously. Doctor, he replied. His brows furrowed as he took in the plain shoes that the doctor was wearing. He very carefully reached out to the being in front of him as it spoke to Sam. He elbowed Sam, hoping that Sam would be able to distract the doctor more. He looked back up as the doctor spoke to him again. Do you want to give me one good reason why you defied my direct order to do the experimental face transplant on Mrs. Beale? Dr. Palmer asked Dean. Dean glanced at Sam, his senses still trying to map out what they were dealing with. Luckily, it was too distracted with keeping up the illusion to notice Dean poking at it. What he found confused him more. It felt like a trickster, but not one powerful enough to pull off anything that Sam and Dean were experiencing. It was like the generic human facade that Dean exuded when anything brushed against his own core being. One reason. Dr. Palmer nodded, and Sam gave Dean a worried look. Sure, Dean quickly grabbed the doctor by the lapels of his lab coat and pushed him against the wall. Let's start with the fact that you're not Dr. Sexy. You're crazy. Dr. Palmer exclaimed. Really? Because I swore part of what makes Dr. Sexy sexy is the fact that he wears cowboy boots. Not tennis shoes, Dean pointed out. He caught Sam's knowing grin out of the corner of his eye. It's a guilty pleasure. I've earned it. Call security, Dr. Palmer said to a passing intern. Yeah, go ahead, pal. See, we know who you are, Dean said. He hoped he wouldn't have to reveal himself. But the trickster, if that really was what they had on their hands, would want to cut a deal and let each be on their way. The couple doctors and a security guard were headed their way when everyone froze. Dean relaxed a little. Maybe things were finally going according to plan. He looked back at Dr. Palmer to see the doctor smirk, his features shifting into that of the familiar trickster they had dealt with before. Irritation flared up in Dean. You guys are getting better. The trickster said with a pleased grin. Was hoppin' you'd get my invite. Dean's eyes narrowed as his fists tightened on the trickster's collar. Wait. You wanted us to come. Sam said. Why? You guys are fun. A lot more fun than the other yahoos I've been playing with, the trickster replied. His smile froze. Dean let bits of his grace leak out. I'd love to stay and chat, but… What's wrong? Dean asked, tilting his head. Got somewhere to go? The trickster's eyes darted around and, one by one, the doctors and interns flashed out of existence and the corridors shortened. You guys, too, we should leave, he said, his eyes betraying his worry. Dean renewed his grip on the trickster and shoved him further up the wall. He grinned up at his captive and unfurled his wings. "But you wanted us here. I thought you wanted to play," Dean said lowly. The trickster stared at the tattered blood-red wings and sagged in Dean's hold. Everything vanished and he was left dangling by his coat collar. "Oh, baby brother," he said sadly. Ended. Moving to the next episode.